I'm Jamie Latour, and here are our first impressions of the Final Fantasy XVI demo. It's been 7 years since the last numbered sequel in the Final Fantasy series, not counting 7 Remake as that's a whole other beast. And boy, have there been some changes. We've gone from pseudo-modern-day fantasy where a boy band drives around the desert in their sweet convertible and eat cup noodles, to full-on dark fantasy world with knights, magic, giant monsters, and tons of murder. Glorious YouTube demonetizing murder. Let's start with the story of FF16. This particular Final Fantasy features Clive, a guy with a face tattoo that is traveling along with a crew who seem like the fantasy equivalent of a Spec Ops team. After some big boy and an ice girl start fighting, Clive is almost crushed to death by a giant rock, and from there, we go into flashback mode. We see him as a teen, tasked with protecting his little brother Joshua, who is the Phoenix Dominant. In this world, there are chosen ones called Dominants, who have the ability to turn into giant monsters called icons, which are basically classic summons from old Final Fantasy games like Ifrit and Shiva. A whole lot of Game of Thrones-y stuff happens, leading to Joshua losing control and turning into Phoenix. Seeing Joshua in trouble, Clive rushes to help, but some weird fire ghost thing arrives, and Clive ends up turning into Ifrit, leading to a good old-fashioned Kaiju battle that has a surprisingly dark ending. Like, it's pretty messed up, actually. I liked it. And from there, Clive is drafted into the army against his will, thanks to his treacherous mother, who better wind up being the main villain because that lady evil. While there's still some stereotypical Final Fantasy dialogues and cliches here and there, this feels like a very mature and dark entry in the franchise. I'm not sure if they took direct inspiration from Game of Thrones, but this feels very Game of Thrones-y. Specifically the early seasons when, like, Ned Stark was still around. The voice acting here is great. Quite possibly the best voice acting I've ever heard in a Final Fantasy game before. And that's quite a high bar to clear. The world is more grounded than usual, aside from people lighting their pipes with their fingers and sprouting wings. The characters all seem to have distinct personalities, with the villains being particularly villainous, especially the mom and this woman named Benedicta. I also liked some of the enemy designs, like the goblins, which look like gremlins when they become gremlins, and Mac from Mac and Me smushed together. After the goof-up that was FF15's story, it's nice to see a Final Fantasy with a world and a narrative that seem worth exploring. And this time, we don't need to watch a whole damn movie to understand what's going on. Combat-wise, this is the most action-y a Final Fantasy game has ever felt. At times, it's almost bordering on being a Devil May Cry game in disguise. You have your attack button, your magic button, a dodge, and a defensive ability tied to whichever icon you have equipped. And the icon that you have equipped also gives you special magical attacks that are mapped to the right trigger and a face button. If you dodge at the right moment, you get a precision dodge. And if you attack at the right time, you can parry, and these will open up the enemy for a counterattack. There's also these weird cinematic dodges and attacks that are basically quick-time events. And there's a bar underneath an enemy's health bar that is, well, it's basically a Sekiro-esque posture bar, which makes this the second game I've played this week that's taken this mechanic. Deplete this bar and you stagger the enemy, which gives you a chance to wallop them with your big attacks for extra damage. Now, in the early portion of this game, I thought the combat felt a bit too button mashy, especially during the big Moorball boss fight, which felt like a slog to get through. However, I think this demo is more or less supposed to serve as the tutorial, so it's more focused on teaching you the controls and setting up the world with oodles of cutscenes. Seriously, the early portion of this game is like 75% cutscene. Your gameplay progress will carry over onto the full release. So it's nice that you could get this part out of the way early and not have to do it again, because, I'm gonna be honest, this is a very slow start to the game. If they didn't include the additional iconic challenge section in this demo, I might have had less positive things to say. But once you finish this part and unlock the iconic challenge, you get a better idea of how Final Fantasy XVI is supposed to feel. You get to fool around with 3 icons now that all have different kinds of attacks and abilities. The addition addition of more magical abilities definitely improves the combat, and I like how each icon has their own defensive option. I am kind of disappointed that you can't control or give orders to the other people in your party, and that they're basically there just to draw the attention of other enemies in the area and do a little bit of extra damage. But aside from that small complaint, by the time I had reached the final boss of the iconic challenge, I was feeling a lot more optimistic about this new action-packed Final Fantasy. Speaking of action-packed, let's talk about them icon battles. They're interesting. It seems like a lot of the marketing for Final Fantasy XVI has been centered on the big icons fighting each other, and we get one of these kaiju battles in the demo where Phoenix fights Ifrit. Now, I'm hoping, like the early combat encounters, this battle isn't indicative of how all icon battles are going to feel, because this was kind of just a glorified cutscene. As Phoenix, you can mash the triangle button to shoot fireballs and press R1 to dodge, and that's about it. The whole thing is a great looking spectacle, but I was kind of hoping for a bit more gameplay than mash the button and watch things explode. Again, this was the first example of an icon fight in the game, so hopefully later battles will have more in-depth combat. Otherwise, I'm kind of worried that they're just gonna feel and look like the battles in Azura's Wrath. Anybody else remember that game? Am I the only one? I feel like after you get past the first few hours and when FF16 opens up, this could wind up being a great big budget action RPG with plenty of wacky monster fights. And to be honest, a slow opening is standard in most Final Fantasy games anyway. Hell, FF13 takes like 20 hours to open up. The story already has me hooked, and I can't wait to get angry at my evil blonde mama. As long as the icon battles gain as much variety as the regular combat seems to, this looks like it could be a whole lot of classic, melodramatic Square Enix fun. I also really want to know what other icons are in this game, because they're all based on summons, so like, is Doom Train in the game? Can I play as Doom Train? That'd be neat. If you played this demo too, feel free to give us your impressions in the comments below, and for more gaming news and guides, check out thegamer.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.